We have three great speakers today. Unfortunately, Brady did not make it, so we have just three speakers, but the schedule will be the same. So we'll have around 30 minutes, 15, 20 minutes for each presentation. We'll have just short Q&A at the end for clarifications, and then at the end, we'll have a discussion. Just please note that we'll try to record this and make it available on YouTube later on. So during the presentations, I would appreciate it if you could turn off your microphone and camera. During the questions, you can put questions either in the chat or use audio. And with that, I think we can start. So again, the idea for the event today is to discuss a little bit about video interviewing. So during the pandemic, a lot of organizations have experimented with video interviewing as a way to have some of the advantages of face-to-face interviewing, but also deal with restrictions, issues with traveling, and so on. And I think it's really exciting to see how maybe we can use this in the future, what we learned from these experiments, and try to figure out how this type of interview fits in what survey methodologists can use in the real world in the next period. So we have some really good talks, and we'll start first with Carole from UCL. She'll talk about some of the things they have learned from the cohort studies.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll just try and share my presentation with you. Can I just check? Can everyone see that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Great. Thank you. So I'm here from the Centre for Longitudinal Studies at UCL. And here we're responsible for 4 national longitudinal cohort studies. And I would like to talk to you today about our experience of video interviewing on our cohort, which was born in 1958, which is our National Child Development Study, or NCDS, which I'll refer to as well as our 1970 British cohort study, which I'll refer to as BCS 70. So at CLS, we've worked in conjunction with NatCen, who are the lead fieldwork agency conducting the fieldwork on the latest sweeps of these surveys on our behalf. So on both NCDS and BCS 70, we conduct surveys with our cohort members periodically and have done since their birth. The latest survey sweeps we have conducted is the age 62 survey on NCDS, and that was age 62 when we started fieldwork with them. They're age 65 now. And the age 51 survey on our BCS 70, and again, they were age 51 when we first started fieldwork. We have at last very recently finished fieldwork for these latest sweeps. We finished at the end of last year. But fieldwork has gone on a lot longer than we anticipated due to the pandemic. We've had a number of challenges. Prior to actually going into field, we spent a lot of time looking into the setup of each of the individual sweeps. And the plan was that both of these would be major sweeps, and they'd be designed to be face-to-face. And within these particular sweeps, we have a number of elements. So they have quite a long interview length of around 80 minutes. We have a self-completion section within the interview for the most sensitive questions. We conduct cognitive assessments. We ask for consent to data linkage. We have additional paper questionnaires. We have an online dietary questionnaire. And on our NCDS study, we have a follow-up health visit, which takes place after the interview. So the key challenge we had during the pandemic is that both surveys were designed and programmed in Blaze to be face-to-face. On our NCDS study, we had already started fieldwork. It started in January 2020, and we had to pause it in the March. On BCS 70, we had already done the pilot, and we were due to launch the survey in June of that year, so that had to be delayed. So there are many challenges of moving to web and telephone, but we decided to trial video. So just to know, I'm referring to it as video interviewing, but I know there are a lot of different names for it out there, and sometimes we call them archive interviews. So just to look at why we chose video. Well, first of all, it's we're doing a longitudinal survey, so we have a number of advantages. One of these being that we hold contact details for our cohort. With a cohort are also they've taken part a number of times, so we felt that they are more engaged with the study and generally more willing to take part. We felt that they would be, and there's increased familiarity of video calling since lockdown happened. Another advantage for us is we felt there was no need for major reprogramming to do it in video. We'd already programmed in Blaze. We thought that video would allow us to maintain some interaction, which was important not only because of the length of the interview being quite long, but because we're also doing cognitive assessments. We also felt that this mode would have minimal impact on measurement and be more comparable. And previous research had presented evidence indicating similarities between video interviewing and face-to-face interviewing on several aspects. We also hoped that the video interview would go well with face-to-face interviewing when we were able to go back to that approach. And I just want to talk through the approach that we used. So we started off with a very small scale pilot in our BCS 70 project, which went well. So we were able to then trial this with more cohort members on our NCDS pilot. And again, this went well. So from the summer of 2021, we did the soft launch on our BCS 70 and then rolled it out on both studies on NCDS and BCS 70 from October 2021. And it was the main and only wave, the main way of interviewing during this time. From spring 2022 until November of last year, we were able to go back using face-to-face as a first option, but we continued to offer a video call for those who prefer to take part in this way. We also used video call interviewing for cases where we struggled to get an interviewer in a particular area. This was another challenge that we had. And at the latter end of fieldwork, we worked on reissue cases as we normally do, but we also worked on reallocations. So those that may have been first issued to video and requested face-to-face, we were able to pick up a face-to-face at this later stage. And I just want to talk through the fieldwork steps that we had for a video call interview. So we first of all sent an advance letter, an email with a leaflet to our cohort members. So only cases with an email address or telephone number were issued to video call, and we had this information for the majority of cases, but there were a small number of cases where we kept back to issue face-to-face. The interviewer would then make contact via telephone or email to ask if the cohort member would be willing to take part. When they made this call, they would check that the participant had internet and a device that they could use in order to take part in this way. The interviewer would then send a Teams invite, provided they agreed to take part in this way. So just to note that all our video calls took place using Teams, as this was felt to be the most secure and technically feasible method of doing these at the time. The interviewer would then post out some documents to the participants, so the paper self-completion questionnaires. They would include a letter that gave some information on taking part by video call, and along with this, a letter cancellation document. So this was a document that we needed as part of our cognitive assessment, and that was sent in advance. The day before the interview was scheduled, the interviewer would do a reminder call, and this is just to check that the participant was still happy to take part by video call and quite comfortable to do so, and to sort of act as a reminder and check that they had everything they needed, including the paper documents for the next day. Of course, the interview would then be conducted, and at the end of the interview, the interviewer would remind the respondent to return their paper to return all the documents that they'd received. So that was a paper questionnaire and the document that they used for the cognitive assessment. So just to note that all these stages for the video call only phase took place remotely. So we were limited in our tracing activities that we would normally do face-to-face. We did do some tracing, but it was all done remotely. And I just want to move on to talk a bit further on how we and what we did to set up the interview on MS Teams. So we made some minimal adaptations to the program script, but it was more or less the same as we already had. And the interviewer was able to conduct it very much like they would face-to-face. The screen sharing, so if the interviewer needed to show anything such as a show card or a leaflet, they would do this through the share screen function. Occasionally, they would even be able to share the interview script as well. We made some minimal adaptations to our cognitive assessments. One of those, as I mentioned, sending out one document in advance of the interview. So the paper documents, as I said, were sent out in advance, but we also were reliant on these being returned by the cohort members or the participants at the end. In a face-to-face interview, the interviewers normally pick them up or collect them from the participants at the end of the interview. So we were relying on these being returned. I'll talk a little bit more shortly on how we administered the sensitive questions, but just to mention that these were programmed into a web survey and given to the respondent to complete via the Teams chat function. And last, but by no means least, I just wanted to mention the interviewer training. So we had to train all the interviewers working on the project to be able to conduct a video call interview. So in terms of the devices used, well, the interviewers use their one device that they would normally use, but when they were speaking to the respondents, they would advise them to use a computer or laptop to take part in the video call. And they did in the majority of cases, but I just wanted to mention here that we did have people take part on smartphones and tablets. So these worked well and we had no issues on these slightly smaller devices. And I just want to move on to discuss some preliminary response findings with you. Just to mention that fieldwork just finished at the end of last year, so we're still gathering together our final response findings and our final data. So this is just interim at this stage. So just to note, these figures I'm presenting here are based on the mode the case was first issued to. So it doesn't take into account our reissue fees that we normally do and the reallocation. So that's when we allocated a case to a different mode. Just to mention that our overall response rate that we achieved for our NCDS survey was 69%. And for our BCS 70 survey, it's overall it's 61%. If we look here at our in-person or face-to-face first issue response rate, we can say in general, actually, we found our face-to-face response rates dropped slightly after COVID. And in NCDS, we can compare directly back to what we were getting before we had to stop back in March, and we were getting a response rate of around 72%. So the response rate we got after this period when we restarted was lower at 65%. And on BCS 70, I can't compare directly back, but if we look back at our age 46 survey, which was conducted face-to-face, we were getting a response of around 73%. So our face-to-face response rate is lower, but the age 46 response that I've put there also takes into account the reissue phase, so it would be slightly higher. If we're to look now at sort of what we were getting as a video call response rate, well, I don't think it's any surprise that we got slightly lower in NCDS compared to the face-to-face response. But on BCS 70, it's actually very similar. But what I would say is around 50% as a response rate for this new mode for us, we were quite pleased to get, especially with the number of limitations we had in terms of our tracing. So we were pleased to get that, and we were very pleased to have been able to conduct around 5,500 video interviews across both of our studies. And I just want to touch briefly on consent rates. So I mentioned earlier we have a number of elements or components to these latest sweeps. So we wanted to look at the agreement for people to take part in these different elements, looking at them by in-person or face-to-face and by video. And what I would just say briefly is we haven't seen a great deal of difference. So that was really good for us to see. And that's across both our NCDS study and our BCS 70. I now just want to talk in a little bit more detail about how we administer the sensitive questions. So in our sort of face-to-face survey, this would be when the interviewer would hand their laptop to the respondent and ask them to enter their responses themselves, or by CASI as we tend to refer to it. But of course, we were unable to do this a video call interview. So what we decided to do was to program these questions. It's around 10 minutes of questions, and we programmed them into a web survey. And the interviewer sent the link to this web survey to the respondent via the Teams chat function. And what they would do is ask for them to complete it then, while the interviewer just waited online. For those who weren't willing or able to do it in this way, we had an option 2, which was where the interviewer would share their screen for the participant to see the questions themselves, read them themselves, and just respond when giving a number of their response option. And finally, if they didn't want to take part in this way, we had option 3, which was where the interviewer could arrange to send an email the next day with the link to the interview for the participant to take part after the main interview. One thing I wanted to say is we sort of learned as we went along with this, and on our video call pilots, and it was a soft launch in BCS 70, what we discovered was we did have a number of cases who said they'd be willing to complete this web survey after the interview, around 15% of cases. And in fact, they never actually did complete it. So we wanted to boost our overall response rate, and that is where we started to, we added in this option 2, and that was of the interviewer sharing the screen. And from that, we were able to boost our overall response rate to this particular section. I now just want to touch briefly on the profile of participants, looking at it by the different modes. Again, just to highlight, this is very much based on interim findings because we haven't as yet got our final data through. So one thing to note, just looking at sex in general, we tend to have fewer males taking part in our surveys compared to the issued sample. But what we can see here is we actually have slightly fewer males taking part in the video in our BCS 70 study compared to those taking part face-to-face or in person. Again, if we look at the economic profile, I have NCDS here on the left and BCS 70 on the right. If I look at the profile between the two different studies, NCDS is our older cohort, so it's not a surprise that we have more here that are retired. But really focusing on the difference between the modes, the video and in person, what we have can see in both the studies is we have slightly fewer sick or disabled people taking part by video than we do in person. And on our BCS 70 study, we have more employees taking part in the video than we do in person. And this may well be because they're more familiar with the technology. Just touching briefly on marital status, we have, again, very similar profile between the two modes. One thing just to mention is that we seem to have slightly fewer single people coming through on our BCS 70 survey, and that is taken part by video compared to in person. I now just want to discuss a little bit about our view on, based on our experience, on the future potential of this mode of interviewing. I think we can safely say we're quite pleased how things went for us, and we were able to restart interviewing when face-to-face visits weren't possible. But there are a number of things to consider when thinking of this mode. One of them being is the type of survey. I think we had a number of advantages being a longitudinal study, but you might not have the same take up in a cross-sectional survey. Another factor is to think about is the contact details. Again, we're very fortunate in that we had good contact details for our participants. Interviewer training, of course, this is a key thing to consider, is that we had to train all the interviewers to conduct video calls. I'm not quite sure what the landscape will be for this going forward and whether interviewers will generally be trained in this, or this is something you would have to factor in. Another thing is to consider is technical capabilities, and not only of the interviewers doing the interview in this way, but of your participants being able to take part in this way. We did, of course, have some participants were unable to take part, but we found that as time went on, the interviewers actually got quite good at troubleshooting with them and helping them take part in this way. Another thing to consider is that the costs, and of course there are a number of cost benefits to doing a video call interview in that the interviewers aren't having to travel, but then you have to consider if you would have to be training the interviewers in the first place and weighing this up. Another thing to consider is the provision and return of documents. Of course, we had to make sure the participant had received the documents they needed in advance of the interview, and we're also relying on them returning them afterwards. I think one thing to also mention is the availability of alternative modes and switching modes. So when we moved back to doing a face-to-face interview first, we didn't have that many of our participants request to do a video call interview. So I think if you were only having a few cases coming through, is it worth the sort of setup that's required to offer this? And this is something to consider. And also the switching of modes and how that works. I think there's a number of different ways of doing this. It might be that the interviewer can easily switch between mode, or it might be that has to be reallocated to an interviewer that is able to interview in this way. And finally, of course, just to mention measurement comparability and data quality. And this is, of course, something that we are looking into in a lot more detail, and we look forward to getting our final data to really scrutinise this. I just want to end by saying that we think more research is needed. And of course, there is a lot going on in this area. And I just wanted to mention the Survey Futures project. And this is video interviewing is an important strand in this. And we're very much working with other people in NCRM on sharing our knowledge on this in this area. But some things that we would like to look at further is the characteristics of respondents taking part in video and how they compare with other modes. We also want to look a bit more about the impact of offering video interviewing, looking at the sample composition and non-response bias, and how comparable the data collected in this way is with other modes. So that's sort of final thoughts on that, and happy to discuss our findings further.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So now we have a few minutes for clarification questions. So you can either raise your hand and do audio question or put in the chat. Otherwise, we'll have more time at the end for further discussions. Okay, so if there's no quick question, then we can go to the next presentation. So Henning, do you want to go next?
Sure. Let me share my screen. Hello also from me. I'm Henning Silber. I'm a senior researcher at GESIS, Leibniz Institute for Social Sciences in Mannheim, Germany. And I will present data we collected within a project in which we were interested in social contexts during the Corona crisis and how they developed. And this study is funded by the German Ministry for Education and Research, and the co-authors here are Theresia L. and Lydia Repke, who are also at GESIS and are also here today, and Alex, who you can see now. And yeah, let's get started. So here you can see how egocentric a network looks. And as you can imagine, asking about all the social contexts and the ties between those contexts is very effortful for respondents. And in our case, we asked for up to 20 contacts, and we asked 10 questions about each of the contacts, which amounts to 200 questions. If you give 20 contacts, and we encouraged respondents to give so many contacts, so many did. And we also asked a lot of questions about ties, which would be 190 questions. So in total, it was 390 questions about just the social network. And in self-administration, that is very difficult to collect. There are some studies about asking networks in self-administration modes, particularly in web. But and it works, but when networks are much smaller, so maybe you can only ask up to 7 contacts or something like that. So it's very interesting to use an interviewer for those kinds of data collections, and that's why we used live video interviewing. And here you can see the network, the data collection tool that we use for the networks. It's called Network Canvas, which is open source software, and it's visually very nice for the respondents. You can drag and drop names in certain areas. You can also connect names if they know each other and so on. So that also helps to provide a joyful environment for respondents. And this tool specifically, there are also tools that can be used in self-administration, but this tool is only for interviewers. So another reason to use interviewers in our study. And here you can see just an example how the data collection looked like. I have to say our data collection was much more small scale than the study presented before. So we will see we have had just 4 interviewers. That was a small project, but we still try to have everything as standardized and neutral as possible, with a neutral background, with plain shirts, with the same environment every time, such as scripts for interviewers and so on. And for our study, we used the existing panel, namely the GESIS panel, which is a probabilistic mixed mode panel, which is usually administered online and mail. In Germany, with the adult population, general population, it has about 5,000 respondents. Most of them answer online, and there are 4 waves per year. And you should also note that our data collection was not a usual wave, it was an additional data collection, which also affects the response rates, as you will see. And the study was fielded in July and August 2023. We only contacted onliners from the panel, and we used a stratified random sample, which was based on characteristics that were important to our study, but we also couldn't use too many because the sample was relatively small. And we used, for the stratification, we used age, vaccination status, and loneliness. In the end, we reached 160 respondents, which was also the goal of our study, but we had to ask more people than we originally thought. So we only had a response rate of 17% and had to reach out to 960 panel members. And here you can see the different steps of our data collection process. We started with an email invitation when people started a web interview, which was also used to schedule an appointment for the video calls. Then we sent out up to 2 reminders. We also gave incentives, which was 15 to 20 euros. Later on, we increased to 20 euros to just encourage more participation. And we had 4 interviewers for our data collection. And here you can see the detailed participation rates of the 960, 564 or 60% started the web survey. But of those, only about 40% scheduled an appointment, and again, about 65% of those who scheduled the appointment completed finally a live video interview, which means we have, as I said, 17% response rate in the study. And here you can see just very briefly the demographics of the people who were invited and who participated. And we had for the invited persons, we had about a mean age of 50, while there was 48 years for the people who participated, so there was not so much age difference. Similarly for gender, the distributions looked quite similar. However, we had quite a large effect just on the descriptives here for education. The sample was anyway skewed toward highly educated people, and it was even much more so for the live video interview. Now I would like to present 3 research questions on participation and participation motives to you. The first is who took part in the live video interview. So we had the panel data, so we could look beyond demographics and also at some attitudes and other variables. Then we also asked the question about the motives of participation of the people who took part. And finally, we have also evaluations of the participants and the interviewers about their experiences. Let's start with the first research question, who answered to the invitation, who took part, who did not. And here we have quite a set of variables we could look at, and we found significant effects for education. So more highly educated people were more likely to start with the web survey. People who were higher on extraversion were more likely to start, and people who were surprisingly, I think, higher on conscientiousness were less likely to start. And now again, we would expect that direction. People who had more positive attitudes towards service in general were more likely to start. Then we also looked for the next stage of the people who started the survey, who dropped out and who participated in the interview. And here we looked again at the exact same set of variables, and we found again demographic effects. In our study, female response were less likely to take part, so a little bit different results than in the study described before. We found also that people with which had more income were more likely to take part. People who were higher on conscientiousness this time were more likely to participate after we started the survey, and people who had higher trust in science. And we also found for one variable that is related to the substance of the study, offline contacts, that people who have more offline contacts were more likely to also participate in the live video interview. How does it look for the motivation, our second research question? And here we had a ranking question where we asked about different criteria why people participate in surveys. That was based on another study that used the same criteria, and we selected 8 different reasons to take part, and respondents could select 3 of them. And what was selected the most was purpose by more than 70% of respondents. Also, the topic was selected very often. Other reasons that were mentioned were incentives, the sponsor, also data safety. What we found also interesting here, that the mode was rarely mentioned. We would think that maybe that should play a role as well, but there's of course also there might be different, sometimes also different reasons when the response reports. Or you also need to be a little bit careful about the self-reports. Then we looked also at different age groups for the reasons, and found quite interesting differences, particularly for young people. They mentioned incentives much more often than When older people, and with young, we mean people that were 39 years or younger. And older people mentioned more often the sponsor and data safety, and the old category in our study was 65 years or older. Finally, we also looked into the feedback from participants and interviewers. Let's first start with participants, and they rated the survey as the questions as very understandable. So 87% said here very much. And they also liked the technical setup. So many people rated that rather high or very high. Also, the interviewers had quite high evaluations, and here we asked them to rate the respondents. So how was the interest of the respondents? That was relatively high. Also, the willingness to answer was high, and their believability. I think in the talk before, there was also something about sensitive questions. You could see that, that item in a similar direction, that there might be a low social desirability bias. Then we had quite a lot of technical problems in our study. In 48 cases, which is 30%, there were some kind of technical problems. The main problem was some sound problems, but there were also problems with Zoom that we used for our interviews. There were also problems with the screen sometimes, and most of them could be resolved. The 25 is troubleshooting, so just they were called, and we tried to solve it somehow. And but however, for 14 interviews, they had to be conducted simultaneously with Zoom and calling them by phone. But that worked also quite well. So actually, only one interview could not be successfully completed of all the 160. And we also had quite often the case that a third person was in the room. The interviewer rated it only in one case as a major interruption. However, that is also quite a lot. And there might, of course, be also an effect on the answers. Let me briefly summarize our results. With respect to participation, we found that with respect to who started the web survey, that demographics and personality were relevant, and also attitudes towards surveys. With respect to who completed the live interview, again, demographics and personality were relevant, but also here trust in science and offline contacts. With respect to the participation motives, we found that across all age groups, purpose and topic were the main motives. That the live video mode was rarely mentioned by anyone, and we found quite some relevant age differences in the motives. Then overall, we found that live interviewing was a very positive experience, particularly for the respondents. And however, there were some technical problems which, however, could be resolved. And also the third persons that were there often were not perceived as a distraction by the interviewers. We also have some practical takeaways from our study. First, for this study setup where we wanted to collect social network data, we think this interactive question is very helpful and also important to have an enjoyable survey experience. Based on the motives, we think the future studies could emphasize the study's purpose even more. High incentives are relevant, particularly for younger participants. When for older participants, data safety and the sponsors seem to be more relevant. And we also would like to strengthen that came also in the talk before, that careful interview training and interview instructions are very relevant. particularly in our study, there were a lot of problems. So interviewers need to know what they can do to resolve them, and there should be also a protocol to follow that not every interviewer develops his or her own strategies, so to keep the interviews auch as standardized as possible. Finally, what would we expect, or what would someone who conducts a similar study expect? There will be a lot of technical problems, probably. There will be also a lot of dropout before the interview starts. We didn't experience much dropout after the interview started, and we had quite low response rates. Even so, we were in touch with the respondents before. So, in case someone wants to contact fresh respondents, the response rates could be even lower. Yes, thank you very much. I look forward to the questions you may have.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. So any quick questions, clarification questions now? Okay. If not, we can move to Jan, and then at the end we'll come back to questions. So Jan, do you want to go next, please?
First of all, thank you so much for having me today, Alex. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about the incorporation of AI interviews in web surveys. And before I start, I would like to thank my co-authors David Ponescu, Cornelia Neuert, and Joshua Klaassen. So without them, I couldn't present today the research. They did a great job supporting me in doing that research. So let's start with an introduction. Just now, yeah. So we all know that web surveys are increasing, and there's an increasing demand in high quality data from web surveys. So we see that web surveys especially overcome or replace or replaced other survey modes, and this especially applies to in-person interviews. For instance, we see that large-scale social surveys such as the European Social Survey and the European Value Studies, that they also start utilizing web surveys. However, the problem is so far that there's some indication that web surveys are not entirely ready for taking over. And the reasons are, for instance, low response rates, that web surveys also impact participation for people who might be illiterate or do not have pronounced or very high literation skills, or who are just not familiar with the survey language. And aligned with that, we also see that sometimes, or in some cases, web surveys also have some problems with achieving high quality data. And one reason, at least this is my opinion on that, one reason could be that there's an absence of interviewers, so they cannot assist when respondents have problems. And it's also hard to build trust, motivation, and engagement during the survey. The good point is we're living in a really exciting time. We have new developments in communication technology and in generative artificial intelligence, and all these new opportunities, technologies, and advancement, they introduce new opportunities for data collection through web surveys. And the main idea actually is to fuse elements of interviewer-based surveys, and web surveys. So what do I mean by that? So we can make we can make use of the advantage having, for instance, lifelike AI interviewers in combination with self-administered web surveys. So we try to fuse key advantages of both survey modes within to one. However, so far there are only few studies that already utilized virtual interviews. There are some studies, especially conducted by Fred Conrad and colleagues, and I highly appreciate that research, but it's still pretty rare. And also the results are somewhat inconclusive when it comes to respondent satisfaction and data quality. And sometimes those studies were either conducted in a lab setting and or with small sample sizes. However, there's a few we can learn from when it comes to AI interviews, namely pre-recorded interview videos that are built in web surveys. Actually, it's the very same procedure as we would do it today. And here we can see that contemporary studies, for instance, conducted by Brady who could make it today, that we can see there's more disclosure of sensitive behavior, so we see less rounding and also less error variance. However, what's the idea of AI interviews, or what's the AI part behind the AI interviewer? In order to explain it, I would build on the framework developed or proposed by Benny Chang. So overall, we have to distinguish 4 different steps. So we have the image generation, we have the text generation, we have the text-to-speech generation, and finally speech and image animation. So you can see that the second step, the text generation, is in gray because I would leave it out today, because what we do is we're focusing on avatars instead of agents, so they are not responsive. We have a scripted survey, so we don't have to do the survey on the fly. So it's scripted. We know what questions we want to ask, so we don't have to generate any questions during the survey. So I would leave that part out. So image generation, usually AI interviews or image are prompted through so-called descriptive keywords, which would then, for instance, define how an AI interviewer should look like. However, the problem is when we instruct AI models through descriptive keywords, we have the problem. Sometimes we have a biased data set, or we train on too few instances, which may result in distorted or not well-designed AI interviews. So a problem could be also that an AI interviewer would be designed in a stereotypical way. So this is a huge challenge when it comes to the image generation. Another challenge is also the text-to-speech generation. So, for instance, and when we have out of vocabulary words that we're not usually used to, but they have to spell it either way. And here we sometimes face like misspellings. So it's not like so the AI interviewer wouldn't spell the word or the term in a way we used to from our language. We also have problems with the acoustic model, so intonation and pronunciation. So the text and the speech do not really match up, which is also a problem. And when preparing or when generating speech, we just put short audio snippets together, which is also a challenge because it may interrupt the fluent speech of the AI interviewer. And finally, the speech and image generation. So this is another challenge because now we have to put together, so we have to end up with a result in which we have like a smooth interplay between the text, the speech, and now with the animation. And what I've faced so far is that especially the animation of the interview, so the body language, the mimic, and the gestures, so sometimes they feel very artificial. They are not really natural, which is still an unsolved challenge when it comes to AI interviews. So, for instance, in this research, we just showed the AI interviewers from the core to the upper part, like to the head. So let's go ahead. Research questions. Overall, we address 5 research questions today. So the first 2 research questions deal with the evaluations by the respondents. We look at the evaluations of the AI interviews, so in terms of warmth, naturalness, rapport, and so on, and also when it comes to survey satisfaction. Our third research question looks at the response effort in terms of response times. Then we also look at the compliance with the survey task, namely the video playing and getting the survey questions read by the AI interviewer. And finally, we look at item non-response as a data quality indicator. So let's check how we created the AI interviews. So in this study, we built on, it's called HeyGen. It's a commercial provider. So you can go to the website. They have like, you can sign up and have like a trial space where you can, where you can create some questions. So if you, however, you have a stripped down version, so with just some few opportunities to create them. So if you want to have the full spectrum, so you have to sign up. The good point here is still that it's easy to do. However, there are some challenges when it comes to the speech, to the creation. Also, the variation of the AI interviews is limited. It's good to use, but you have to keep in mind that there are some clear limitations that need to be overcome in the future. So let's take a look at the study design. What did we do? We ran an experiment in a smartphone survey with about 1,500 respondents and collected response times through the embedded client-side power data tool. We have a between subject design with 4 groups. So we have 2 male versions and 2 female versions that differ with respect to their clothing, how they look like, how they dress. So, and he would distinguish between casual and business casual. And the AI interviews were all called Alex, and at the beginning they introduced themselves. We administered 8 questions, 6 closed questions and 2 open questions. And the questions deal with, for instance, family relations and women at workplaces. In order to play the video, they had to click on the video on the play button, and then the AI interviewer would read the questions to respondents, and they could repeat that over and over again. So they could replay the questions at their own convenience. And at the very end, we asked some evaluation questions regarding the AI interviews and regarding survey satisfaction. That's what we did. Let's take a look at the sample. The data is, brand new. We got the data just in December 2023. We use cross quotas for age and gender plus education. And we have about, on average, our responses are about 50 years old. We have about 50% female respondents. And when it comes to education, we have about 40% with low education, 20%, 25% with intermediate education or medium education level, and about 30% with a high education level. And when it comes to the effectiveness of random assignment, we do not find any statistical differences between the 4 groups when it comes to age, gender, and education. But let's start to look at the results. So for the first research question, so we look at the AI interviewer evaluations. Here, first we look at warmth. So we have a tendency to, respondents' evaluations somewhere, so in the middle. So we have a 7-point scale with a slight tendency to a positive evaluation in terms of warmth. However, when it comes to rapport, so we see that respondents could not really bond with the AI interviewer. One reason might be that they were just not responsive. So they were unresponsive, and this could be a good explanation for the low rapport evaluations of the AI interviewer. When looking at naturalness, again, we have the same picture as for warmth and for authenticity as authenticity. We have a very similar picture. So we have like the responses, or on average, they group up in the middle of the scale with a slight tendency to a positive evaluation of the AI interviewers. So let's take a look at survey satisfaction. Here we can see that the survey satisfaction reported by the response were pretty high, so they are close to 6. So they are really satisfied with the survey. And when looking at the response times, we can also see that response took about 3 to 4 minutes to take the survey across all 4 interviewers, AI interviewers, which is, I think a decent time. What I can say here is when looking at the response times, of course, there are differences between the closed and the response with the open questions. So the open questions took a bit longer, of course. And now when looking at the video playing, so at least once, we can see that more than 80% of the response clicked on the video and listened to the video. So we have a comparatively high compliance rate here. And when looking at item non-response, which is an indicator for data quality, it's for AI interviewers below 1%, which is also pretty low, which is good news, I guess. Let's take a look at the discussion conclusion. So what can we see regarding the AI interview evaluation? We can see that they all perform similarly well, irrespective of their gender and irrespective of how they look like, so how they dress. However, the rapport evaluation, they somewhat lower than the other evaluations. And again, one argument would be, or can be, that they are not responsive. They cannot respond to response. They just fix. They say what they say, which is, I think, a downside. So there's also no difference regarding survey satisfaction across the 4 AI interviewers. However, the survey satisfaction appears to be high. It was about 6. So they were quite satisfied with the survey. As I said, I think this is good news. What we also can see that the AI interviewers do not pose a different response effort to response. So they all achieved pretty similar response times, which indicates that different speech behaviors of the AI interviewers do not seem to introduce comprehension or answer difficulties. Again, and importantly, respondents play the videos, so they follow the survey task, and this points to the fact that a general survey question processing is taking place. From a data quality perspective, it's good to see that the item non-response is really low. It's on average across all 8 questions, it's less than 1%. However, similar to the response times, we have a higher item non-response rate for the open question rather than for the closed questions. And this is also what we know from previous research. So those findings are aligned with what we would expect. Future avenues. So first of all, we need to conduct some subgroup analysis on look at data quality more closely. We just got the data, so there was not much time to dig deeper. So, but the good news is those future avenues points we can really achieve in the near future, just looking at the data. I think another point would be to include more natural answer formats. For example, I would say let's try to go for voice communication channels. So instead of typing in text for open questions, we could also ask respondents to provide an oral or a voice or an answer in form of speech input. Another point is going beyond commercial providers. So I would argue that even though the commercial tool works good or decent, I think it's important to develop an open source infrastructure for AI interviewers where we do not rely on any commercial limitations and have to use AI interviews that were never tailored to survey purposes. So now we really rely on what is existing, but I mean, those tools were never designed for survey purposes. So they're quite, not quite, but they in some way they are limited to what we want to achieve. And finally, I would say the goal would be to move from avatars to agents. So to build responsive and autonomous AI interviewers that autonomously or that can autonomously interview respondents. So we don't have to be scripted, and they may also be able to respond to respondents' answer behavior and or cues from their voice, for instance, or typing behavior and survey navigation. So this is also quite limited in this study today, but let's see, maybe we should achieve that in the near future. Many thanks for your attention. So you can find the slides on my website or send me an email. And please feel free to follow me on Twitter. And again, many thanks for having me today.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So now we have time for discussion. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand and then we can hear the question. So any questions for Jan or one of the other speakers? Yeah, Matt? You're muted, Matt. So...
Sorry. Yeah, thanks everyone for your presentations. They were all great. I had a clarification question for Jan, just about how the survey works in practice, and you talked about the respondent having to press the play button to play the avatar. I was just wondering, was that on every question? So on each screen they had to press a play to play a separate video for each question? Because I was wondering, when you showed the compliance figures where you showed that 80% of people played a video at least once, if there was a video on each screen, I was curious as to whether people just kind of pressed play on the first opportunity that they had, but then on later questions maybe they thought, I don't really need to play that video, I can just read the question and answer it. I was curious about
that. Yeah, thanks for your clarification question. So what we did in the survey is it was one question per survey page and on each survey page or for each question we included an AI interviewer video in which respondents read the questions, the respective question on the page, and they had to at each page. So we were talking about it. So if we should try to automatically start the video, I mean, this would be possible without many problems, but we decided not to. So we wanted to give respondents the opportunity to navigate autonomously through the web survey. And over the course of the questions, so you can see that the compliance so slightly drops, but it's not like in a way so it would fall below 50%. So
Thank you.
so it's about, I think, if I looked at the data yesterday, and my co-authors, so please, they are also here, so if I say something wrong, please interrupt me. But I think the drop is a max of 5%, the max.
Okay, thank you. Can I squeeze in one more little question while I'm
Go for it, Matt. Yeah.
I know you didn't look at this in your study, but I just wondered if you had any sort of general sense as to how the kind of respondent satisfaction scores that were given in terms of like rapport and warmth might compare to other studies where people have been asked to do this when they've been interacting with a human interviewer.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, so in the next step, it would make sense to try to compare the AI interviewers to pre-recorded interviewers. We did the study last year, so we did it. We were a bit in a rush because it was close to the end of the year. We had to spend the money, and that. So there was more time to do it, and also. Another problem is when it comes to recording human interviews for a pre-recorded study. You need quite some equipment, which we do not have. So, but I didn't present it in that presentation now, but we had another control group with the text-based survey. So this is what we try to compare now, especially data quality, to the default setting, which is text-based.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? So while people are building up the courage to ask questions, so I had a general question for all three speakers. Actually, two of them. So one would be, how do you think you're going to use video interviewing in the future in the kind of survey you work with? And then I was wondering, what are the challenges that you think are there to using this kind of mode in the future? So maybe we can go in order. Carole, do you want to start and say what you think?
Thanks very much for your question. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think we've made any firm decisions on this, but one advantage we have of video interviewing is we have a number of our participants who live abroad, and we can always issue them when it comes to the face-to-face element, because we don't send interviewers abroad, although I'm sure they might like that. But so this is one way that we can also include them in the study and do it this way. Of course, it's something to think about, and I think some of the challenges are related a bit to the cost and whether interviewers will be trained, and what we sort of have to do to allow that to work. So it sort of depends how things move forward on video interviewing. But I think there are a number of advantages for us, not only with immigrants, those living abroad, but those who might not feel comfortable having someone in their home. I know we've picked up a few people who might not have taken part otherwise. So
yeah, and just a quick follow-up, like, I guess you need to figure out how many interviews it's worth, is it worth doing the training and setting up, how many interviews would you need to do in order to make that to make sense? I don't know if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think that is a key thing, and I know we're working a lot alongside the agencies that we work with on this, and I think, we work with two agencies on these studies, and we trained interviewers in both these agencies, and so that might well be for future that we're able to tap into that again and use that training. And the way they set it up with the agencies was quite different. So we had one where they had a specialist team of video interviewers who just did the video interviews and I think some telephone interviews as well, and the other ones where they trained their field force to be able to adapt easily. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that works going forward, and if they sort of maintain that those with that specialism. So I think that's something we just have to see what happens when we come to our next sweeps.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Henning, do you want to go next, thinking about how will GESIS use video interviewing in the future and challenges with that?
Well, so for our project, we will have another data collection this year. So we will use it again, I think, for small projects is in a good opportunity, because it's hard to, with 4 interviews, to go to the homes of respondents in the entire Germany. But for large-scale studies, particular studies with complex assessments, think about it. We have a study about cognitive assessments. It's called PIAC, that heavily discusses options along those lines. I think many other studies might or have already moved completely self-administered. Yeah. Another option would, of course, be with pre-recorded interviews for self-assessment. I think that's more feasible for large-scale studies.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of an interesting option where video would be just a part like self-completion. You would have a video part where you think the interviewer would be helpful or the recording would be helpful. So that's kind of an interesting approach. Well, Jan, what do you think? What are your thoughts about video interviewing or about using agents or avatars for interviewing?
Yeah, I mean, I just started working on that topic, so I'm quite new to the field. And I mean, there is not that much evidence now. I think so. It's quite exciting to work with that. But I mean, as I said, just go to HeyGen and try to check how it works. Still, so there are challenges with respect to the speaking, with how they behave. I mean, so now just from the previous question from Matt, so there would be, I mean, another 2 studies you could just conduct how to check how to do it best. I mean, there are just many open questions, but I mean, we can learn from pre-recorded video interviewing. I mean, there's, for instance, in the Dutch ESS, so they tried to do it, so we can learn from those studies because they are really, really similar. And I think there's a lot of potential. They're really time efficient, so people can do it self-administered. It's comparatively cheap, but again, I think we should stop relying on commercial products, and at some point, we as survey researchers, we should try to hook up with, for instance, computer scientists, and try to come up with our own solutions that are good tested or well tested, and that are really aligned to our purposes. So I think, but there's a lot of research to do now before we really can go big, I guess.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So any other questions from people in the audience? Yeah, Henning?
I was just curious because we experienced so many technical issues, how that was for our other 2 studies, if there were any cases and whether they could be resolved.
Oh, thank you for that. Then, yeah, I think it's a good thing to raise. I don't have exact figures with me. I know we did experience technical issues, but it was a small sort of percentage of the overall. And what we did find that, we were able to help talk them through it, and the interviewers were able to sort of help. And as the interviewers became more confident, and we found that very similar issues came up. So they managed to sort of, in the beginning, there was more so, and we managed to easily find a resolution to it, and we were able to talk through the participants. And I think that was sort of a big part of, being able to help them to take part, but it was a bit of learning as we went along. And I think from our sort of pilots and our soft launch, we were able to modify our training, and sort of we had our interviewers had a sort of more experienced interviewer that had worked in the pilot and the soft launch that they could go to and get some sort of training and buddying to sort of solve some of these issues. So some of them came through, but of course, the actual results, we were able to resolve some of them. So I haven't quite got some of the figures on that, because a lot of cases the interviewer was able maybe to call them a different day and find out the solution in the meantime. But yes, I think it is a very good point and something that we sort of improved as we went along.
I have to admit that I was really surprised that we didn't face any any big issues during the data collection. So, I mean, my colleague Carolina Neuert from the GESIS Leibniz Institute was in charge of the data collection, but it worked really smoothly. So also the including of the AI interviewer videos in the web survey software. So it worked quite well. There were almost no problems. I know from my other colleague Joshua, who's also here now. So he had some problems with generating the videos. So for instance, especially with the pronunciation, intonation when it comes to some specific words. So he had to work with spaces and so on to do some pause. So it was really, at some point he was really struggling to get a good sound or a sound speaking of the question. But when it comes to the web survey itself, so this worked really good. I was really surprised.
Great, thank you. I was also kind of surprised with the difference between the first two presentations. In Germany, I know there was lots of dropout between kind of the appointment and the interview, and it didn't seem to be an issue in the first study. So I don't know, Carole, I know you had a kind of a graph with the different stages, but did you have an issue with people dropping out? I also saw you have this stage where you would call people the day before the interview to try to minimize that.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things. The dropout, I haven't got firm figures on that. I'd have to look at that in more detail. But I do think the reminder call was important. I mean, we get dropouts anyway, even face-to-face when things happen like that. So it's something I'd have to look back in a bit more detail. It doesn't seem to have come through as being a big problem in a video, maybe compared to face-to-face. But I think the reminder call was very helpful because it allowed them time to sort of think about it and check that they were happy and they had everything. And we had to have a bit of time between arranging the initial interview and then the call, because we had to allow for them to have received the documents in advance. So that was something else to sort of make sure that they had received the documents. We had a few cases where they had to proceed anyway because the interviewer didn't want to lose them and they just weren't able to do that particular cognitive assessment in a very few cases. But it definitely hasn't come through as a major problem, but something we will look at in a bit more when we have some more data.
Henning?
Yeah, I think one big issue might also, besides all the more resources and more thoughtful setup and so on, was that it wasn't a regular wave within the GESIS panel. I think that there would be lower dropout if it would be just framed as a normal wave. And another issue is that many people were willing to take part in the web survey, so there were actually not so much dropout. And if it would have been just self-administered at that point, we would have experienced much less, but there was additional step with scheduling, additional step with taking part, actually showing up for the interviews. There were a lot of steps and we lost people over there.
Yeah, that's also very interesting. I guess the mode switch is different, right? Because you're going to people that are used to web survey to face-to-face, while the cohort studies is used to be face-to-face, so it's kind of more consistent. Yeah, that's a good point. Jan, I had a question for you. So I don't really know this area very well. So I don't know, the idea of creating agents sounds kind of exciting and also a little science fiction. So I don't know, how realistic it is to be able to do that in the, I don't know, next period? Is that something that it's relatively easy to do, or it's more long-term creating agents, video agents that can interact with respondents?
I mean, so it's definitely not short term. I mean, there are too many questions, methodological questions involved, how to design them and how, I mean, again, the question, so should the video start automatically or should respondents be in charge of playing them? And I mean, another point is now we have just one video, but if you would like to go or to move to agents, so you would also like have a constant video stream, so seamless videos, and we would also have the challenge that the AI interview, or the agent behind that, would need to be able to interpret response behavior in real time. I mean, I think for computers, for instance, this could work quite fine. But for edge devices like smartphones with a lower computing or with lower computing resources, this might be more challenging. And again, in this study, we decided just to go for smartphone respondents to tackle all the other issues that are involved with other devices like PCs. So with a microphone, so the good point with the smartphone was now it's a one device which includes everything you actually need. We just worked on a research proposal which we submitted to do the research on AI interviews and to move to agents. But there's at least I would say there are another 5 years to go before we have really like or maybe 3 years. About 3 years, we have a proper solution we can really use with responsive agents that autonomously interview respondents. Yeah. So
Well, good luck with the grant proposal.
thank you so much. Fingers crossed.
Any other questions, thoughts? Well, if not, I want to thank the speakers. I think this was really exciting to see these very different studies and kind of exploring the possibilities of video interviewing. And I know all 3 of you are working in this area, so hopefully in the future we can see what other interesting things you find and how you're going to implement them. And thank you everyone for joining the event.
Thank you.
Thank you for organizing it.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex. See you soon.